is more than integration, it's founding biblical principles. That's where we're going this talk. We just came from the last talk where we redefined education, right? We said, hey, if Christ, in Edwards' terms, he's a luminary. It's his glory that sources everything. We, in his creation, we receive his glory. His glory works through us, and we live in a way that it reflects back to him. But everything is his. From him, through him, and to him. It's all his glory. So we've redefined education. And we've talked about education to the degree that, hey, education is, we're breaking up how to understand his work in this world. And we do it according to domains and content. So, if we're talking about the art of communication and telling stories and developing purpose and meta-narratives, we have literature. We talk about the role of cause and effect and responsibility and life and God's sovereign hand over its history. We talk about identifying constants throughout the universe that examine and discover the order that's in it and the logic and the quantitative basis. That's math, and the math goes right into the empirical foundations of what we see in science that examines nature and its interplay from the infinitesimal to the infinite. And we go through all the different domains, and in all of it, Christ is saying, this is mine. I've specifically created each facet of creation so that it would project and reflect my glory. And so as educators, we're treasure hunters in that. And so as I talk about this talk, it's more than integration, it's foundation. It's what's to connect between this view of Christ is exponentially greater in the systems of this world than the sun is in the systems of the solar system, right? And so how do we integrate that into the lesson plans? And the first is just simply, it's developing the rationale. When I talk integration, my perspective is integration is often, hey, we developed a lesson plan, and now where's the biblical principle I can tie into that? If I've got 135 hours to teach throughout the year, then maybe I'll try to find, if I'm good, 135 different ways to integrate biblical principles to a lesson plan I already created based on objectives and maybe often heavily dependent on the textbook. And so it's tacked on. That's why I'm using different terminology when here at Dewey, when I say it's more than tacking on. It is the foundation. It is the focus and purpose of education. And so in that we say, okay, we start off at Dewey. What's the biblical rationale? What in this lesson plan, where's God revealing himself? We're treasure hunters. Where is he revealing himself, and how do we equip our students with the tools to seek him and find him? That we have the ears to hear and the eyes to see. Obviously, there's a supernatural part in salvation we'll get to later. But as our job as educators is biblical rationale first. Where is God revealing himself? Why did he create this facet of creation to communicate what about himself? And then from that, we build a worldview of what is the coherence from our knowledge and understanding of Christ and creation and his scriptures to then how do we live and how do we think through and build this worldview. And then we're going to be comparing and contrasting it to other prevalent worldviews that our students confront in their classes, in life, in media, in the university, and career someday. So we start off, we say foundations. What's the rationale and what's the worldview we build from that rationale? We want to apply here what we believe is best practice. If you're familiar with McTee and Wiggins' book, Understanding by Design, they really push this concept of backwards design. And in backwards design, you say, hey, you start with what are the outcomes? That's just logical. We've seen that in leadership theories like the Covey principles for years. What are the outcomes? When it's all said and done, what do we want to accomplish? And then we go from the outcome to say, okay, let's assess it along the way to make sure we've accomplished it. So what does assessment look like? Then we'll talk about lesson planning. I know when I started teaching, I was just, hey, lesson plan, and now what does assessment look like? And I'm not sure what they ended up looking like, what the big outcomes were. start and go backwards. So by starting with the biblical rationale, we're saying, first off, we're developing standards, and I'll talk you through the standards in the rest of these talks. These standards say a student, when they're done with this class, will be able to demonstrate their knowledge of these major standards, principles, and biblical integrations are fleshed out in this domain, this subject. And so from there, the standards are only 4 or 5, maybe 6, and they go from 5th through 12th grade. Students are getting the same patterns, and we know from best practices, the more students get the same patterns, they're going to develop long-term retention, greater understanding, critical thinking, to be able to own it and express it, personalize it, and live based on it. So we start with standards. Then assessment. As curriculum writers, and teachers, that's your role to hey, formatively assess. Are they getting it? Practice it. Then summative assessment. According to standards, are you getting this? Can you do it not with me feeding you it, but you have processed it, thought through it, and you produce it. And then we're going to push for that they would do it again, because we know intermittent times of rehearsing, reviewing the same materials increases long-term retention. And so we'll do an end-of-course test, and we'll do it again in the capstone. And it's not 135 disconnected integrations. It's 5 or 6 major standards that found our entire scope and sequence. And students get it, and they own it. And then from the assessments, where they're constantly practicing it, then we go into lesson plans. And that's where I'm really going to focus over the next several talks of what does that look like? What does that look like for you to take these major standards and flesh them out in your lessons? So I want to approach it, these talks, as first off, there are some overarching major themes that cut across all domains, and we'll develop those themes that will later be fleshed out as standards in your subject. And then there's a way that you teach specifically depending on your subject. We call it subject-specific pedagogy. And so I'm actually going to flesh out what the standards look like in each subject differently, and so you get it. And I want you guys to watch it for each of the subjects. And the reality is, because Christ is inexhaustive, you're going to be giving us feedback at Do that we'll constantly further develop and create a more robust platform for our foundations. And then from that point, our greater vision is, as we do it with lesson planning and our scope and sequence, the building foundations, we're also going to implement discipleship materials for schools to walk life on life with students. We're also going to push for service, and we believe that those 3 components together is really directed not just at the mind, but the whole student, so they would see the glory of Christ, they would submit and seek salvation from Christ and live for Christ. So that's where we're going this talk. It's foundational, it's true education, and it's Christ-centered.